In this video, we're going to look at how to set up a workshop activity, which is surely one of the most useful ones where students can peer correct. The first thing we need to do is turn editing on and then scroll down to where we want to have our activity. We'll add it here. I click on Add an Activity. As usual, this menu comes up and I want to add a workshop activity, which we find here. I click on it, add, and it takes me to this screen, which I imagine is beginning to be familiar to you. I'm going to use this for students to submit and compare each other's essays, and I'd like to set it up to be as much like our essay feedbacks on ICC as I can. So I'll just call it Internet Democracy. I'll leave the description blank. Next, we come to the grade setting. The grading strategy, we want to be accumulative. You're given different options. It could be just comments with no marks. We could be counting the number of errors, or there could be a rubric, a kind of check form, as in the example that you may have tried already. But accumulative grading is just adding the marks up as we do for an essay marking. It should go in the uncategorized so that it doesn't get mixed up with other real course marks, and we'll make it out of 100 because that's more normal for an essay. The grade for assessment is something different. The first grade is for the quality of their essay, but this is peer marking, and they get a grade for how well they assessed the original, and that's based on the average of all the other students. We can leave that out of 20, and again it should be uncategorized. Assessment grade to pass, no need for any decimal places. Next, we're going to do the submission settings. Those will be the settings for when they submit their work, and then the assessment settings for when they're grading other people's work. So submission settings. I click on it and I want to give them instructions as if it was just their normal homework. So here, write an essay with bibliography to answer the following question: does the internet encourage democracy? There is a reading pack and lecture on Moodle, and I have actually for these created a link using this button to the reading pack and the lecture. Of course you don't have to do that, and I won't show you how to do it now. This essay is to be placed on your folder, and that's the simple homework instructions. Next, I want to show them how to actually use this activity, so I'm going to add more instructions. When you have written your essay, click on the Start Preparing Your Submission button below and copy and paste your essay into the box. Use anything as a title. And this Start Preparing Submission button is what they will see when they try to submit, and there is a box for title which has to be filled in. I'm going to set this up to be anonymous, and so I will reassure the students of that so that they don't feel that others are going to know whose essay they're marking or whose they're giving feedback to. And lastly, I just want to encourage them to do this on the deadline, because the timing of this really matters. You have to have all of your essays in and then redistribute them to other students to mark. Not sure if I completely like the look of this. I might, maybe I'll make that green, and I want this to be important, so I'll make that red. When I finish with that, I can move on. Number of submissions and attachments. You might want them to submit their essay as a Word document. I prefer not to. It just makes things complicated. Some of them use Apple computers and some of them can't open the documents from Apple computers. And if we do it all just pasting into the box with no files, I think there's less room for confusion. If you do want to allow them a submission, you're given the choice of only allowing PDF, docx, etc. You can specify what forms it'll take, so you can get over that problem somewhat, but I think just for simplicity they can paste it into the box. Late submissions. I'm not going to allow any submissions after the deadline because, as I said before, the timing from moving from the submission phase to the assessment phase. It wants to be done quite smartly. And now assessment settings. These are the instructions the students will receive once they've submitted their essay, and now they come to mark other students' essays. Again, I want it to be in the form of instructions. Please look at the 3 essays you have been assigned and then give them feedback. You should also give them mark for each section that the essay would achieve. This feedback is important to help these students improve their essays before marking, so try to give advice on how to improve in each area. Please provide feedback and mark under the following headings: task fulfillment, organisation, use of sources, etc., and each one out of the correct mark. Just for the joy of life, I might make those blue. I also want to give more information here. One thing that's important is that they understand how the marking criteria works, and I want them to mark their essays using our marking scheme. So I provided a link for it here using the same button as before, the link button. Finally, I want to set the deadline very clearly, and once again I'll do that in red. The next deadline is a few days later. It's given them the weekend plus a day or two to do this marking. Students may assess their own work or not, depending on what you wish. I think I'll leave that unchecked and move on to feedback. As part of the activity we're going to have is feedback. I'll leave it blank for now. This next section is rather interesting, and I'm not going to go into it now, but I could, if I wanted to, use an example submission, and that could be an essay that I think is particularly good and another that I think is mediocre, and they could check their marking against my own marking of the same essay, and that would be something they do first, and then afterwards they would mark their peers. It's quite useful for a small task. For essays, I feel it's a bit cruel to make them do it, but there is such a one set up on the example on the course for introductions. Availability, depending on when you're doing this, you would set it up differently, but of course these are going to coincide with the dates that I gave in as my deadlines in this assessment settings and submission settings. And if they are enabled, it's possible to switch to the next phase automatically, or you might want to do it manually, and I recommend doing it manually the first time, otherwise it might automatically switch when only one essay is in, and it's easier to avoid disaster. So set this up as per your own deadlines, but don't do that unless you feel brave. Finally, common module settings. As usual, we'll hide this to start with while we set it up. The last one we might look at is restrict access. If you've set up a group, you can make it visible only to your group. So finally, we'll save and display. That takes me to this page, and this page will become familiar. It's kind of workshop central. It's the place where you'll do everything from now on, and the students will also see this. So it's divided into 5 different phases, and we're now in the setup phase. You may remember that when we were setting up the activity, we left that first block blank, the set the workshop description, but that doesn't matter because we can get to all of those settings from here, and in fact there's a red cross there to remind us that we haven't done that yet. Let's do it now. It takes us to this same page that we've just been on, and the block and the box that we left empty, and I'll just paste in a description there and scroll down back through all those things we filled in. Save and display again. Now I can see there's a tick. We want to work down here, and when all of these ticks are green, it means we're ready to move on to the next phase. So what have we still to do? We've got to edit the assessment form. Well, let's do that now. I click on it. it's offering me what it calls aspect and grade. Aspect 2 will have the same thing, aspect 3 will have the same thing. And what I'm going to do for these aspects is have them the same criteria for the marking sheet. So this aspect 1 will be task fulfillment, aspect 2 will be organization of ideas, etc. The expression aspect 1 also will appear to the students, so I want to write task fulfillment quite big here so that it's able to compete with this. I'll call it task fulfillment grade out of 30 plus comments on how to improve, but I'm going to make that big, heading large, I'm going to make it bold, and I'm going to make it blue so it stands out. Next, I've got the grade. We want it to be a point grade, which means you just give them the number of points, but there could be no grade or a kind of sliding scale. Maximum grade, well, that's up to you to choose, but because task fulfillment on their essay feedbacks is 30, I'm going to make this 30. And the weight is just 1. Next, aspect 2, and we're going to do the same as we did before with a large blue heading with organization of ideas, grade out of 20 this time, comments on how to improve, and of course we'll use point and grade out of 20. Here's aspect 3, use of sources out of 20, maximum grade 20, and oh, it looks as though we've finished. Do not despair. There are blanks and I can just add more aspects as I wish. And there's 2 more, and if I want more I can just add. But we only need 4. Linguistic features out of 30, maximum grade 30, and we're done. Save and preview. It tells us what the student will see. And the student is going to see this. They're going to see Internet Democracy Assessment Form, Aspect 1, and we've made this very clear. Grade for Aspect 1, choose. Notice that the out of 30 part is already included here, and they can type their comments in here, etc. And after Aspect 4 there's nothing. So that looks alright. I might just check that if this says 30, this is 30, yes, I've done it alright. So I can go back to editing the form. And then save and close. Now I'm happy with how this looks. I can switch to the next phase, either by clicking here or just by snapping on the light bulb here. It wants me to be absolutely certain, and I am. Now that we're on the submissions phase, the activity is open to students and they will be able to start typing their essays and pasting them in, etc. But nothing more. There's one more thing I want to include in the setup though, that doesn't have to be done yet, but it does have to be done before we move to the assessment phase, and that's making all the names invisible. We promised that everything would be anonymous, and so we'll set that up now. I want the administration block and permissions. And permissions is essentially a list of powers and possibilities combined with a list of who can exercise those powers. To simplify things, we're only interested in who can view what, so I'll filter it with the word view. And for example, view workshop, I can see that everyone can view the workshop, including students, and that's how we want things. View all assessment, view submissions, view author names. Students at the moment can, and I don't want them to, so I'll just click that X and remove, and you see students have disappeared from that list. View authors of published submissions is something that we haven't covered, but we'll take students off it. That's just say you have a very good essay and you want to let everyone look at it. That would be a published submission, so we'll make that anonymous as well, even though we're not using it here. And view reviewer names. Are students there? Yes, they are. We'll take them off there. Remove. Once we've done that, there's no need to save it. We can just go back and that's done. The course is now set up. It's running. It's open to students. Perhaps it would be helpful just at the end of this setup video to see the students' side of things. I want to change my role to the student so that I can see what the student sees. This is a useful thing and it's done from here, but one can't do it in an activity. So what I first have to do is go back to the main course, and now I'll be given the option of switch role to, and I want to choose student from the list. And now when I look at this workshop activity, I should see what the student sees, which is nothing because I forgot to make it visible. Return to my normal role, turn editing on. Week 6, turn to edit, show, and now I can switch my role to student again. And here it is. I open it as if a student, and my instruction is simply submit your work. When you've written the essay, start on the Start Preparing Your Submissions button below, and here it is. Copy and paste your essay into the box. To find the box, we click on the button, there's the instructions again, and here's where the student will paste their essay. They need to type a title, and I told them to write anything there, but not their name. And when they've finished, they can save their changes. Once the essay is submitted, they still have the option to edit the submission or delete the submission, but the student can't do anything else. In fact, they won't be able to do more until the teacher has moved the activity on. So if the student moves back to Internet and Democracy, submit your work is ticked green for them, but there's nothing yet to submit. If I return to my normal role, I can see that allocate submissions, I'm expected 3 and now 1 has actually been submitted. So that's good news.